Desire is not always about connection. It's often about control. Arthur Schopenhauer paraphrased insight. You thought her gaze meant interest. You thought her touch meant longing. You thought her attention was about you, but it wasn't. It was about power, about the feeling of being wanted, of knowing she could draw you in. Schopenhauer warned us, desire is deceptive. It doesn't always seek union, it often seeks influence. Many men confuse female desire with emotional depth. They mistake chemistry for compatibility. They don't see that sometimes what she wants isn't you, but the effect she has on you. And when that moment passes, they're left confused, hurt, and bitter, because they thought it was mutual. But in truth, they were part of a game they didn't know was being played. In this video, we'll explore Schopenhauer's raw, unfiltered insight about misunderstanding female desire. You'll learn the difference between emotional interest and energetic control, how to read subtle signals without illusion, and how to stop giving your self-worth to someone who only wants to hold it, not honor it. Subscribe if you're ready. To stop confusing desire with destiny, like and comment if you've ever felt used by something that felt like intimacy, but wasn't. Schopenhauer believed that desire at its core is a manifestation of the will, not of reason, not of clarity, and certainly not of love. And when it comes to male perception of female desire, the truth becomes even more uncomfortable. Men often assume desire is always mutual. You feel drawn in by her eyes, her smile, her attention, and you tell yourself it's about connection. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about power. Not power in the toxic sense, but in the deeply human thrill of influence. And if you're not awake to that distinction, you'll confuse momentary dominance for meaningful intimacy. This is what most men don't see. When a woman is aware of her effect, when she knows she can stir something in you with a glance, a gesture, a word, it gives her a feeling of control. It's not always malicious, but it's not always romantic either. Sometimes she's not seeking closeness. She's affirming her power. And if you're emotionally hungry, you'll miss it. You'll tell yourself, she wants me. But Schopenhauer would say, you want her wanting you. And that's the illusion. Not her desire, but your interpretation of it. Desire, in this context, becomes a mirror. You see yourself reflected in her attention, and you assume it means something deep. But often it's just surface, it's momentary, it's situational. She may want the feeling of being wanted. She may enjoy the chase more than the catch. She may use attraction not to build connection, but to feel alive. And Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, would argue that many human interactions are less about communion than about control over perception. She wanted to feel powerful, and you gave her that thinking it was love. This misreading doesn't make her evil, it makes her human, but it makes you vulnerable, because once you assign meaning to her desire, you hand her your self-worth. You believe her gaze is proof that you matter. You believe her softness is a doorway. You start shaping your actions around maintaining that spark, and before long, you're not relating to her, you're managing her attention. That isn't connection. That's emotional captivity. And Schopenhauer would say, the will traps us when we mistake stimulus for substance. The result is often emotional confusion. One moment she's warm, the next she's cold. One day she's leaning in, the next she's pulling away. And you're left spinning, trying to make sense of the signals. But what if there are no signals, just expressions of her own internal rhythm? What if what you thought was seduction was simply her enjoying the feeling of being seen? What if her desire was never about you but about herself? Schopenhauer would argue, your suffering begins not when she changes, but when you realize she was never truly interested in the first place. The man who begins to see this pattern doesn't become cold, he becomes discerning. He stops confusing energy with intention. He learns to ask, is this desire about me or about the effect I create? Is she pulling me closer or simply standing in her own gravity? Is this connection or choreography? These questions don't kill desire. They clarify it. They prevent you from being seduced by the performance of closeness when true closeness was never the goal. Men often believe they're reading reality, when in fact they're projecting fantasy. That moment when she smiled, lingered a little longer in conversation, touched your arm as she laughed, you built a whole emotional blueprint on it. You imagined closeness. You imagined exclusivity. But Schopenhauer would warn, the will interprets what it wants, not what is. You didn't see what was happening. You saw what you needed to believe. And in that belief, you handed her the keys to your identity. This is the cost of misunderstanding desire. You start shaping your self-perception around her reaction. Her presence validates you. Her interest becomes your proof of being desirable. But desire built on her attention is fragile, because it's not anchored in who you are, but in how she feels in a passing moment. And those moments change, not because she's cruel, but because she was never committing to you, she was expressing herself. Schopenhauer understood this. We suffer most when we mistake the spontaneous for the sacred. What men often miss is that women can express desire without emotional investment. They can enjoy attraction without expectation. They can lean in without wanting to stay. And when a man is emotionally unprepared for this, he mistakes movement for momentum. He assumes the story is unfolding when, in fact, she's already writing a different one. Schopenhauer would call this a form of emotional vanity, not the vanity of ego, but the vanity of assuming all desire must lead to something meaningful. This leads to a dangerous dynamic. The man becomes increasingly invested, while she remains grounded in the moment. He plans, interprets, hopes. She flirts, engages, and flows, and the asymmetry deepens. Eventually, he feels blindsided. She changed, but she didn't. She was consistent. You just imagined a direction she never promised to walk in. And now the pain he feels isn't rejection, it's the collapse of a fantasy. Schopenhauer would say, this is the suffering of false expectation, a suffering more common than betrayal. The emotional damage compounds when the man ties his worth to her attention. Every pullback feels like personal failure. Every silence becomes a wound, and so he overcompensates, becoming more available, more affirming, more intense. He's trying to reignite what was never lit. He's chasing something he only imagined existed. This is where his identity starts to dissolve. Not because he's weak, but because he gave his strength to a story he wrote in her eyes. And when the story ends, he feels like he disappears with it. The solution is not cynicism, it's sovereignty. It's the awareness that desire isn't always about union. It's often about energy, affirmation, and control. And once you see that, you stop asking what she feels and start asking what you're projecting. You stop chasing signals and start observing patterns. You stop needing her attraction to mean something and start choosing whether it aligns with your deeper truth. Schopenhauer wouldn't say, don't desire. He'd say, don't lie to yourself about what that desire means. There's a shift that happens quietly, subtly, when you mistake her desire for devotion. You start adjusting your presence around her. You monitor how you speak, how you dress, how you show up. You're not being yourself anymore. You're being the version of yourself that you hope will maintain her gaze. And in doing so, you surrender something sacred, your center. Schopenhauer would say that when the will is unchecked, it pulls you out of alignment. You stop being and start performing. Not for love, but for attention dressed as validation. This performance becomes exhausting. You're reading into pauses, decoding texts, tracking energy. And the entire time, you're losing orientation. She's not manipulating you. You've made her gaze your compass. Every moment she gives becomes a directive, and every moment she withdraws becomes a crisis. But she's not your enemy. Your hunger is. She never asked to carry the weight. Salve your identity, but because you placed it in her hands, her natural fluctuation now destabilizes you. This is where men begin to feel powerless, and in that powerlessness, they double down on trying to please. They say the right things, become overly agreeable, give more than they receive, all hoping to reawaken that sense of connection they felt. But that connection wasn't real. It was imagined. It wasn't intimacy. It was projection. And now, every act of giving becomes a form of bargaining. If I show her I'm good enough, maybe she'll stay. Schopenhauer would call this a negotiation with illusion. And illusions don't make deals. They disappear when the truth enters the room. Eventually, resentment creeps in. You gave your all. You were attentive, respectful, open. and yet she pulls away. Why? Because she didn't want a performer. She wanted a presence. She didn't ask you to orbit her, she wanted to meet you. But you weren't meeting her, you were managing her. And no woman, no matter how emotionally aware, will stay engaged with a man who dissolves under the weight of her attention. Not because she doesn't care, but because she can't connect to a version of you that's constantly shifting. And so the man starts blaming her. She used me. She just wanted power. But here's the truth. She didn't take your power. You gave it away. You assigned meaning to her desire. You based your stability on her affirmation, and you lost yourself in her reflection. Schopenhauer wouldn't point the finger at her. He'd point it inward. Because desire, misunderstood, isn't just painful, it's disorienting. It convinces you to abandon your post, to leave your truth, and chase something that was never meant to hold you. The way out isn't withdrawal, it's self-restoration. You have to reclaim your focus. You have to stop building your identity in someone else's gaze. You have to stop reacting to her energy and start observing your own. You don't need to stop desiring, but you do need to stop believing that desire is proof of connection. Once you separate the power she holds from the worth you carry, you stop living in emotional confusion and start leading with clarity. There's something many men never realize. The moment you start needing her desire to confirm your worth, she begins sensing the shift. She may not articulate it, but she feels it. That subtle loss of edge, that micro wobble in your presence. And something in her instinct activates, not to hurt you, but to test what you're really made of. Because desire for her isn't just about connection, it's about the emotional texture of the man she's interacting with. Schopenhauer would call this a philosophical recognition. We are drawn not to form but to force, and when your force starts leaning too heavily into her validation, the polarity starts to die. At first, it's subtle. She takes a little longer to respond. She becomes less present. She jokes differently. Her gaze isn't as charged, but you, instead of anchoring deeper into yourself, lean harder into her. You compensate. You sweeten. You soften. And without knowing it, you start proving to her something you never needed to prove, that your center depends on her attention. She didn't ask for that proof, but now that she feels it, she can't unfeel it. And she begins withdrawing, not from cruelty, but from misalignment. This withdrawal is not rejection, it's reaction. She's reacting to the part of you that collapsed the moment you thought you were winning her. The chase energized you, the spark made you confident, but when desire turned into perceived possession, you relaxed into performance instead. She have presence. Schopenhauer would say, you became ruled by the illusion of having, and what is possessed too easily is rarely respected. So now she's testing, not to play games, but to feel if you're still grounded. She's looking for the man who held his edge, not the one who abandoned it in pursuit of her warmth. And here's where many men panic. The warmth is fading, and they try to reignite it with reassurance, gifts, attention. But the game has already shifted. What she's looking for now isn't affection, it's solidity. She wants to feel the weight of a man who doesn't move just because her desire fluctuates. She wants to feel your clarity when her attention drifts. That's the test. And most men fail it, not because they're weak, but because they assume her pullback is about them. It's not, it's about energy. That energy is subtle but powerful. She may still smile, still touch your hand, still answer your messages. But emotionally, she's stepping back, she's watching, feeling, measuring, and you, if unaware, start scrambling to fill the space. But you're not filling it with presence, you're filling it with need. And need, no matter how well disguised, always reveals itself. Schopenhauer would call this the moment the illusion begins to rot. Not because she manipulated you, but because you turned her desire into your compass. The path forward isn't to pass her test, it's to drop the need for it entirely. It's to return to your internal gravity, to remember that her attention, it is beautiful but not essential, that her desire is meaningful but not foundational, that your power doesn't increase when she wants you, it's revealed when you don't collapse under that want. The man who learns this doesn't chase approval, he commands presence, not to dominate, but to anchor. And in a world where most men drift, she notices the one who doesn't. Schopenhauer taught that the core of suffering is not in pain itself, but in illusion, in the false belief that the outside world is responsible for your inner wholeness. And nowhere is that illusion more seductive than when a man confuses a woman's desire with a reflection of his value. You begin believing, if she wants me, I'm worthy. But desire is a flicker, not a foundation. And the moment you tie your identity to being wanted, you become emotionally unstable, because you've handed the lever of your worth to someone else's shifting instinct. What happens next is inevitable. The moment her energy changes, your certainty collapses. And suddenly you're not relating to her. You're chasing the feeling you thought her desire gave you. That chase consumes your mental space, your emotional bandwidth, your self-respect. And worst of all, it pulls you away from the version of yourself that was clear, centered, and grounded before she ever entered the room. Schopenhauer would tell you, the tragedy is not that she stopped desiring you. It's that you stopped desiring your own sovereignty. But the man who wakes up from this illusion doesn't harden. He reclaims. He sees that being desired is a gift, not a necessity. He sees that connection can emerge only when self-respect is non-negotiable. And most importantly, he begins to choose, not from desperation but from discernment. Her desire may be real, but so is his need to protect his center. So is his need to remain whole in the presence of beauty. So is his responsibility to be led by truth, not chemistry. And when that man walks into a room, everything shifts. He's not looking to be chosen. He's choosing. He's not interpreting every spark as significance. He's observing. He's not flattered by every pull of attention. He's reading it, slowly, clearly, without need. And in doing so, he becomes more than attractive. He becomes magnetic. Because he doesn't need to perform, he doesn't seek to control. He doesn't chase dominance or submission. He simply exists in full possession of himself. And that kind of man? That's the one she remembers because he never tried to impress her. He made her feel his presence just by being. Desire, when misunderstood, creates emotional slavery. But desire, when seen clearly, becomes a compass. Not for others, but for yourself. You begin to notice who you become in her presence. And if that version of you is lesser, smaller, or dependent, you step back, you reclaim, you rebuild. Because the man who leads with clarity doesn't measure his worth by how much she wants him. He measures it by how little he needs her wanting to stand in his truth. And that's when the dynamic changes. Because now you're no longer seduced by attention, you're revealed by it. You're no longer chasing confirmation, you're inviting resonance. And Schopenhauer would say, this is freedom, not the absence of desire, but the mastery of it. You thought her desire meant depth. You thought her attention meant connection. You thought her energy was a sign that something real was happening. But Schopenhauer would tell you, what you thought wasn't love, it was illusion. Because desire, especially feminine desire, isn't always about union. Sometimes it's about gravity. Sometimes it's about power. Sometimes it's about being wanted without wanting back. And if you don't see that, you'll confuse temporary charge for lasting bond. You'll misread chemistry for clarity. You'll hand your worth to someone who never asked to hold it. You believed the feeling she gave you was a reflection of your value. But what you really saw was your need mirrored in her warmth. You didn't see her. You saw the version of you that felt alive when she looked at you that way. And when she changed, when her gaze softened, when the spark faded, you didn't just lose her. You lost your mirror. That's why it hurt so much, not because she withdrew, but because your sense of self was built on her gaze. That's not intimacy. That's dependency in disguise, but now you know. And with knowing comes power, because Schopenhauer didn't tell us to avoid desire. He told us to observe it, to recognize how the will dresses up need in romantic language, to notice how quickly we make stories out of sparks, and to see that the only way to be free is to stop expecting others to complete what we won't confront within ourselves. The woman's desire is real, but your reaction to it, that's yours to own, and that's where the shift begins. The man who sees clearly no longer builds a home in someone else's interest. He no longer collapses when energy changes. He doesn't grip tighter when the warmth fades. He steps back. He breathes. He recalibrates. Because he understands something most men never do, that her desire, while beautiful, is not a destination. It's a signal, a moment, a possibility, and it only becomes something deeper if you meet it from wholeness, not from hunger. So now, you stop asking what she wants, and you start watching what you become around her. Do you soften into neediness? Do you chase the high of her attention? Do you lose yourself trying to preserve the feeling? Or do you remain grounded even as the fire rises? Do you hold your frame even when you feel drawn in? Do you stay seated in your own authority while standing in her presence? Because that's what she's testing, even when she doesn't realize it. She's not just feeling your charm, she's feeling your center. She's sensing whether your desire for her will make you abandon your depth. And the man who holds both, the fire and the frame, is the one who remains unforgettable. Not because he's flawless, but because he didn't vanish into her gaze. If this video gave you that clarity, subscribe to the channel. We're not here to play games, we're here to see. Hit like if you're done handing your value to fleeting desire. And share this with a brother who keeps mistaking being wanted for being worthy. Because once you stop needing her wanting to want yourself, you finally start living like a man she can desire without having to carry. And more importantly, you become a man who no longer disappears when the attention does.